Good night and welcome to Conversations. I am Lana Fingal and I will be your moderator for this evening. Some housekeeping matters before we begin. All mics will be muted. Should you have a question to ask or would you like to participate in the discussion, we ask that you use the raise the hand icon or that you type your comments or questions in the chat. The session will be recorded and it will also be live streamed, and from time to time, members of the media have joined the conversations, and so your comments may or may not be reproduced in the media. I now invite Ms. Shannon Gooden to lead us off with a word of prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we praise and thank you for this day. We ask for your blessing and help us to engage in a meaningful discussion as we gather together virtually. We pray for your guidance and wisdom in matters being discussed and for the opportunity to share our thoughts and feelings with one another. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Shannon. So tonight we will be discussing the topic, the ease of banking in 2022 and beyond. We've all observed the changes in banking over the years, from gone are the days where people went into the bank and completed deposit slips and withdrawal slips to be able to have access to their money. Now all you really need is one little piece of plastic, and now you can have access to all of your funds which you have within the bank. So we've come a long way. So now we don't talk about deposit and withdrawal slips anymore. We more talk about digital banking, and we talk about things like apps and all those type of, and ATMs and all those type of words that have now been introduced into our vocabulary, which have now become the norm. But there's still some fear and hesitation surrounding the use of digital banking. And so we hope that tonight we have a meaningful discussion to be able to alleviate some of those fears which you may have, and to further educate you to give a better understanding of how you can utilize these services to be able to make your life a whole lot easier. And to further allow me now to introduce you to our panel. And I'll start with the lady first. So we have Mrs. Carla Boyce, and prior to relocating to Barbados in 2004, Carla worked in the finance and planning group at IBM in Atlanta, Georgia for 5 years, where she honed her analytical skills. She started with the finance team responsible for the AT&T strategic outsourcing contract before becoming the industry finance coordinator for the media and entertainment industry. Carla brings a wealth of banking experience, having worked in retail, premium, and corporate banking across some of the banks in Barbados. Carla graduated with honors from the University of Tampa with a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting, and also holds an MBA from the University of Miami with concentrations in finance and leadership. Welcome, Carla. And now Dr. Justin Robinson. I don't really think Justin really needs an introduction to the group, but I'll read a short bio. So Professor Justin Robinson is a professor of corporate finance. He's a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and currently serves as Pro-Vice Chancellor, Board for Undergraduate Studies, University of the West Indies, responsible for academic quality assurance across UWI. He obtained his PhD in finance from the University of Manchester, UK. He also holds an MSc in finance and econometrics from Florida International University and a BSc in management studies first class honors from the University of the West Indies, Cayfield Campus, Barbados. Professor Robinson's research interests are capital markets in developing countries, public finance, financial risk management, and corporate finance in developing countries. Professor Robinson currently serves as a director of the Central Bank of Barbados and first vice president of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. Welcome, Justin.
All right, good evening, church and viewers.
And now I introduce you to Mr. Richard Kennedy. Richard is, sorry, let me just pull up his bio. Just give me one moment. Richard is the Chief Operations Officer of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited, recently joining the organization in June 2021. Richard possesses over 20 years experience in the financial services sector, with his most recent roles being Associate Director, International Corporate and Private Wealth Management, and a member of the Country Management Committee at CIBC First Caribbean International Bank. In addition to his roles within banking, Richard is also past president of the Rotary Club of Barbados South and remains actively involved in the club's activities. As the head of the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited Operations Department, Richard is responsible for the majority of the departments in the organization, including loans, marketing, finance, accounts, IT, card and e-services, the contact center, and savings. Welcome, Richard. So I will now allow each panelist to present for about 5 minutes to share their thoughts on the topic tonight. So we'll start with Carla first. Carla?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Lana. And I would start off by saying that the ease of banking is something that I would say would have been for some time. Let's talk about prior to COVID. Prior to COVID, a lot of institutions were really working on making things easier. You would have complaints about long lines during pay periods. There are lots of things. You mentioned ATMs when you were talking. There were lots of things already happening in the digital space prior to COVID. So to help clients do their banking without physically having to come into the branch. And I would say with COVID, that has been accelerated. So institutions overall, banks, credit unions, central bank, everyone has been really trying to make things easier, primarily to protect their staff, of course, the customers as well. It really begs to say from a transactional standpoint, what can we do without persons having to physically come in? So that definitely has accelerated, I would say, with COVID. You have less focus on what we call brick and mortar, less focus on having a building. Therefore, you have ATMs spread in different places and different companies, shops that you go to help things make things easier. I would say banks are also looking at sustainable finance. They're looking at how do we securitize these digital assets that persons have, as the push is now digitally, not just banks. I think companies, institutions, the onus is the cost of doing business as well. The digital element of it is also quite expensive. So we look at how do we make things easier for the customers, as well as looking at remote workers. With COVID, a lot of persons are working remotely still. You have a lot of people move back into the office, but overall, how can we still get, what we need to do done and help the customers? So we have a lot of non-traditional lending that's going on outside of just banks, other institutions. I think all banks realize that we need to simplify documentation. We need to make onboarding easier. And I think that's where the push with COVID has helped, because we need to learn to simplify our processes. There's a lot that goes on in a bank outside of working hours. How do we help that? There's still a lot of transactions that are involved. So I think making that customer journey easier is a big part of what was happening before, but I would say COVID probably has accelerated that tremendously, because people still need to function. They still need to have access to their money. And I think more and more you will see regulation changing. With anything else, we have the push to digital, but you have to still have policies and regularize that and make sure that you have things in place. So I think you're finding that we have to make it more inclusive, and of course make these systems secure and inclusive, including everybody, whether they don't have bank accounts with you, find a way to basically service your customers and reach customers. And it's not necessarily traditional way where persons have to physically come in to do a transaction. So I would say overall, things were shaping digitally before, but that's been accelerated with COVID for good reason. And that's where all institutions, including banks, have to go if they want to make things easier for customers to do their business.
Thank you, Carla. Justin, do you want to share your thoughts at this point?
Okay, good evening. I always struggle with the idea of banking and the church. If we go to Deuteronomy 23, verse 20, you may charge a foreigner interest, but you may not charge your brother interest. So the Bible has always struggled with lending money at interest. So I always tease my students who are Christians and bankers. So, but again, banking has a long history, and the form of banking has continually evolved. So modern banking, as we know it, would have originated in modern Italy, where you had Jews in the ghetto and they would do their money lending seated on benches, and the Italian word banchi, and from that we have the modern word bank. So I see the digital aspect of banking as just another evolution in the way we do banking. In many ways, a lot of the basic services and function remains the same, but the technology and the means of doing it is evolving. So I don't see it as something to fear. It's another stage in a continuing evolution. I mean, I always joke, and maybe I'm dating myself, but I remember when I came to the KFL campus as a student back in the 1980s, we would be hanging out, playing football on campus on a Friday evening, and then it would suddenly dawn on us, we need money for the weekend, and it would be a mad sprint down to the Royal Bank branch at Blackrock because we didn't have ATM in those days. I mean, can you imagine? So to get cash for the weekend, you actually had to physically go into a bank and actually take out that cash and have it on you to spend, because as young students, we didn't have checkbooks, for example. So we had, so in many ways, the ATM branch was the ATM was a big evolution in terms of having access to your financial services. So again, this process has continually evolved, and we moved from the ATM, you could use your debit cards to make your payments and so on. So my view on the digital banking is that it's a continuing evolution in how we access pretty much the same banking services. The same way you had to keep that little bank book safe and keep your records, now you have your ATM card playing that role. And the convenience of it is in many ways unmatched. It gives you the opportunity to pay your bills. So like now I pay all the family bills usually early on a Saturday morning via online banking. Again, that frees up a lot of time. You know, you could come and volunteer and do something at the church or church activity with that time you were spending in a line at the bank. So I see it as a continuing evolution of the way we do what we've always done, but in a manner that puts more power and control in the hand of the user of the banking services. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Justin. And Richard, your turn.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you again tonight. I think as I speak about the ease of banking tonight, I really am interested and excited to speak about how do non-traditional institutions now enter into the banking space, and how do these institutions make the ease of banking possible for persons. And I speak for sure from a context of a credit union staff member, where the credit union is now becoming the primary banking institution for lots of Barbadians. My institution, for example, has over 100,000 members. The second largest one has about 60,000 members. So we're speaking about a large section of the Barbadian population using credit unions instead of commercial banks to be their primary lender. And what does that mean? Their persons now expecting these non-traditional institutions to be able to make banking or access their funds a whole lot easier. They now too want the ATM cards. They also want the Visa debit cards. They want internet banking. They want to be able to access their money from the diaspora. How I'm able to see my funds and so on. So what the emerging institutions like the credit unions and the things they can carry lend that does peer-to-peer lending, how do we make lending easier for the average Barbadian by introducing those things that have made banking easy for persons at commercial banks? That is now the general expectation of persons using these alternate sources. So that is going to be very, very important for us to stay up to date and stay up to the mark with the commercial banks because of the direction persons are going. But more importantly, in the grand scheme of things, not only as it relates to the credit union as an institution, generally the Barbadian population needs to become more comfortable and understand how to use these various options that are now available. We still have persons, and I'm sure Carla can speak to it, who are still scared to use the ATM. You know, we've had ATMs for as long as I could remember, but persons are still very cautious about using ATMs. Persons are still very cautious about using online bill payments, you know. And one of the things that I'm recognizing is it comes down to education, and education at all levels. A bit of research we saw recently is showing that, young persons, they learn their banking habits from their parents or the elders in their family. So for me, I'm accustomed to seeing it as I was growing up. Every month, my mom wrote checks and she put them in the envelopes. She put them in her envelopes, went to the mailbox and she dropped them in and she mailed in her checks every single month, right? That's the way I feel comfortable to pay a bill. I now have to get accustomed to understanding that it's actually safe to make an online bill payment. And that's a learned behavior. So we need to make sure that everybody now is understanding how important it is or how easy it is to use the ATM. Your money is not going to go into an abyss. You're not going to lose it, right? If you make an online payment, it's going to be okay. Online banking is fine. How are we going to make the average Barbadian comfortable? And then by extension, make the younger persons in the society comfortable and get the ease of banking really happening. Because it's something I think is very unique to Caribbean persons. So we look forward to seeing how do we share that and get everybody on board. So definitely what I'm looking forward to seeing and discussing a bit more as it relates to the ease of banking.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. But first, Justin, I have to tell you, you touched on something that brought back some memories for me, because I also work in a bank. And I remember years ago when we were, and maybe Richard himself and Carla might have had moments of this too, maybe Richard more so. And I remember on Friday evenings, everybody was just apprehensive because we knew what was going to happen on Friday evenings, and particularly at the time when the bank was going to close. And of course, you are there. Sometimes you have your plans and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, you would have this crowd of people that would just converge on you. So gone are those days, because now there's no need for that type of behavior, because we have ATMs, we have all other ways for us to access money. But you touched on something, Richard, which is something that's very topical. And you touched on the fact when you talked about the elderly and young people. And one of the things I know that's been observed is that there's a resistance from the elderly to embracing technology. Of course, we recognize that, it's primarily because of their age. But what we also find surprising is that some older persons actually fully embrace the whole idea of electronic banking and digital banking. And so, whereas on the other hand, we've also discovered that there's some young people who really fear electronic banking. They're quite fine and so with all their phones and that type of thing. But as it relates to banking, some of them don't even have bank accounts. So, yeah. So how do you think we can, what educational channels do you think we can use to further educate persons to get them more comfortable? Richard, I'll start with you.
So again, thanks, Lana. But the first thing that comes back, I found the research pretty interesting on my end recently, where I recognized you learn from those around you. So you learn or you understand anything in life. So the way we may cook food, the way we may speak, the way we may prepare, basically the way we dress, it's a learned behavior from those who are older than us. And as I said, for me, I've learned my financial habits from my family members. So I know that you pay your bills every month because I watched my mother do that. I remember when I was getting my mortgage, my aunt told me, you can't do big things and small things at the same time. So if you're going to get your mortgage, just make sure that that's it. Don't go get any other small bills because you won't be able to afford it in those initial years. So that has always been with me for a very long time, right? So I think the critical thing is we need to start educating persons, the older persons, around the ease of doing banking, how easy it is, how safe it is from an early age. So we're going to learn from those persons because that's the person you trust the most. You trust your mother, you trust your father, you trust your aunt, right? And then the other thing that we need to do is make it something that we integrate into our education system. We go and we learn about the flag, we learn about all these various holidays and so on. We learn about things that, it's good information, but what do we know about financial management? How do we understand? My friends and I, we had a conversation the other day about how do we invest? It's not something that we typically know. I'm a banker and I feel as if I've even sat in Justin Robinson's class in my finance course, that second year finance course, that was really hard. And
Man can't remember the name of the class.
it was really hard. It was traumatic. But I'm there. But no, I'm ready to invest. I'm not very comfortable about it because it's not something I've carried on for a long time. So I feel as if we begin to train persons from a young age around these things, is going to make it easier. I saw one time a group of school children came to us and we taught them how to use the ATM, how to use internet banking. And I feel if we inculcate that in children from a very young age, then they begin to, you demystify the strange thing about the banking, where your money goes, it's safe. So we start from educating the adults and also educating the children from a young age around what banking is and those non-traditional methods in the minds of persons. So I think that's what we do.
Thanks for that. So we have one question popping up here, or one comment I would say, and I see this is from Adrian to everyone, but we'll go to Carla to get a little bit of her thoughts now on what the traditional banks are doing, because I mean, everybody loves to hate banks these days. And I think Justin kind of touched on it before, where it is, it's relationship now that everybody's into relationship building. But at the end of the day, we go into things, and you yourself touched on it, Carla, where we're moving digital, but there's a cost to doing digital and going digital. And we know that the hot button topic right now is fees and those type of things. But what do you think banks can do to better explain this to clients, to better explain the benefits of using the digital banking and so to clients?
I think the banks do a fair amount, I would say, on social media right now, but I think you may have a case where maybe the elderly may not necessarily be the ones on Instagram and Facebook. So I think there's a lot out there already in terms of trying to really demystify a lot of the opposition that you get to digital banking. And I'm glad you guys touched on it. It's not just, I think everybody always thinks it's the elderly, but a lot of times it's different segments that just have this fear that it disappears and you can't find it and it can't be traced. But I think the idea that we need to start from young is extremely important. And there are things that a lot of us don't learn until we start working, and just basic things with, you mentioned not having a bank account. Getting folks to understand that you should be opening bank accounts for your kids, your babies, different things. You should be getting really involved and understanding. And a lot is that fear and asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask somebody at the ATM, how do you do this? And you'll find generally a lot of staff in the institutions are more than willing to help. But sometimes there's that fear that I don't want people to know that I don't know what to do, or I don't know what to press. And I think the ATM machines themselves, I'll be honest with you, can be very intimidating. So that's another thing, we're getting people to feel like, it's okay, we all understand, you can do the transaction again, you can cancel. I remember I had one person tell me, and this was related more to highways and driving, and they were afraid when they in the States, if you get off the wrong exit, but you have to consciously tell yourself it's okay. And if the machine cancels or times out, it's all right, you could try again. And I really think a lot of that is the discussion that Richard even mentioned too, for having somebody come and say, listen, show me how you do this thing online, and really overcoming that fear, because things happen. You can send money. You meant to check Lana, but you put Carla instead, but that's okay. You can arrange to have the money come back and so on. So it's not like the end of the world, but I think people do have this fear that if they touch something wrong, I found that even myself with my mom, just doing, for example, these sort of calls, I had to sit with her and get her comfortable. And a lot of that is that, and it's something you have to practice. But I feel like once people realize how easy it is, the average person is like, oh, most times I didn't realize it was this easy. So a lot of it's just really that fear and having those open discussions and starting in schools. So getting kids to understand about saving and putting things in an ATM and putting things in a bank account. Although some people might argue keeping it in piggy bank is probably better. But there are lots of different things we could do with discussions starting early in schools. I know a lot is done virtually in terms of social media stage, in terms of getting people, but even having forums like this, where people understand that it's okay to ask a question, it's okay not to be sure. And then you generally find that when people try it for the first time, they're hooked. And I'm surprised when we find out how many older people, and you hear, oh no, the person is 70 something, oh no. And the person says, oh, I have a tablet, I know how to do. So you find overall, it's a lot more discussions like these, a lot more interactions with school kids, the elderly, letting them feel comfortable. It's okay to not know and ask a question. I think that's a big positive. But overall, we find people are just afraid to ask the question. But when they do ask, you find that it really, really flows from there, and people easily say, oh my God, if I had known this was this easy. And now you find the average person is like, oh, let me tell you how you could do this easier. And oh, I found this other ways. I think overall the discussions, and because of COVID, you probably have to have a lot more virtual sessions as well to get people on board.
Thanks for that, Carla. And there are some comments in the chat, which I'm going to get to and engage Justin on. But before we get there, as you spoke, Carla, one of the things that came to mind as we began to discuss fear, I think part of the fear too, and part of the fear with asking for help comes from the fact that I've observed people at the ATM, some older folk at the ATM. And you're right, they're intimidated by it. And sometimes they may, yes, but sometimes they may look around and they asking somebody if they can help them. And I think part of when I see that sometimes, unless it is a bank employee, I always get very fearful for them myself, because sometimes you can find either some well-meaning persons, yes, but we also know fraud can occur very easily, especially with older persons. So I think maybe we probably perhaps some of that fear comes from those type of things as well. And we can touch on that a little bit later in ways how we can overcome that, and maybe some of the ways that the banks and credit unions are dealing with that to try to get the information out to the older persons without having to engage strangers. So I'll go to the comment in the chat here from Adrian and from Annette as well. And then Justin, I'm going to engage you on this. And Adrian says, I think that a lot of the elderly use the occasion of going to the post office to cash their NIS checks and to do their banking for their social interactions. And we need to consider the negative impact of removing that social space for that cohort. And Annette responded and said, yes, she agrees. The social interaction for older persons is something that older persons look forward to. The infrequent times that I go to the bank, I always see someone that I haven't seen for months or years. Now, banks will probably tell you, you know, you could probably mingle outside instead, or you can probably mingle in the supermarket. It will probably cost you less than if you actually try to go into the bank to do a transaction. But Justin, what are your thoughts on those comments?
Yes, I mean, that's a very important point. I mean, and we don't want to underestimate that. I did have that very unpleasant experience as NIS chairman, where we tried to introduce pensions being lodged directly to bank accounts. And we actually offered an incentive where normally you get your pension every 2 weeks. And we thought we would sweeten it by saying, if you opted for the direct deposit, we'd put the entire month's money in at one time. And then I was totally abused on the calling programs, denying all the old people. So we don't want, so that social aspect is extremely important. However, you know, I think more than the social is that if something is not broke, why fix it? So for other people, they were doing their banking, they go into their banking. So why should they change? I mean, what is the value proposition for them? So I think the financial institutions have to make that clear. What is the benefit in it for a person to change something that was working for them quite well? So they don't really understand why I need to deviate. And that's one of the benefits I hope that we can keep from COVID. A large number of persons were introduced to online banking somewhat by force, and even things like church and so on, where people were doing online church. So persons who were not familiar or didn't use the computer had to get online. And I think this is a sort of unique moment where you can really sell that, because in some ways, I think the elderly are in some ways the most vulnerable to physically going to the bank. We hear a lot about the fraud with those NIS checks and going to the banks and ATMs. So I think they in many ways can benefit a lot more from it. And sometimes what I wonder is the extent to which institutions can look at combining the online banking with something of the equivalent of like a Zoom or something like that. You know, when you are online, maybe you can have a chat, because I get that feedback from a lot of persons. Because Professor Moore and I actually did a study sponsored by First Caribbean on internet banking in the Caribbean. And one of the comments we got consisted, people in the Caribbean like to feel that, you know, if something goes wrong, I want to be able to ask a question to somebody. I don't just want to be. So the extent to which the banks themselves or the institutions can offer that some sort of online chat feature or something, I think that can go a long way, because one of the single biggest factors we saw in that survey, you know, if something go wrong, I need to be able to ask somebody a question and not beat up on the computer screen and so on.
That's actually an excellent point, Justin, because I mean, that's an excellent feature that banks and credit unions can perhaps look to add to their apps, because you're right, it would be quite easy to have something like that at your fingertips. So if you get stuck, and maybe that would encourage people to utilize it more, because at least you would have that knowledge there. Like if I get stuck here online, I can ask somebody and I'll get a response. So very good point. So I have Dion in the chat also saying, her comment is, sometimes the challenge with online banking is that some of the portals are not very user-friendly. Richard, what are your thoughts on that?
I tend to agree. I think very often, if it's not something we're familiar with, you're already a little apprehensive and a little nervous using the platform. And then when you go onto the platform, it's not always the easiest platform to navigate. And as an institution, one of the things that we keep saying, we need to be more intentional about putting the information out there, and putting the information out there in a way that is easily understandable to our members and our customers. One of the things we kept recognizing is that people literally just don't know how to use it, right? And we thought about and we thought about things like maybe we need to do more videos, do like the Giggard and Booze type things, where we have a little education session on the television. Everybody watches the news after a certain station in life, and you're able to capture those persons. So I find, or even some good pictorial representations in the newspaper and that type of thing, that helps people to understand what can you do, how does it work, that level of interaction, because like you said, people really love the interaction. Unlike the commercial banks, the credit union finds it very difficult to tell its members, because everybody is a member-based organization, and we don't charge fees, right? So we don't have a way to keep people out of the organization, to say, if you come in, we're going to charge you extra. And people really do come to the credit unions and certain institutions to engage staff members who they believe they're part of the family. So it's really hard sometimes to convert those persons. But what is more important, though, is helping them to understand how important it is to do it. Because during the COVID period, when they couldn't get their pensions because they couldn't leave home and they needed funds to do certain things, that's very, very important. But so we need to make sure we find ways to educate them in a way that's fun and simple and exciting, so they understand how to navigate this new world behind the computer screen. So I think it's very, very, very important for everybody to do that. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Richard. As you were talking, what came to mind for me, and as I reflected on what Justin said as well, in terms of the initiative from NAS, which was a very important initiative, and one which is not really, maybe is not that embraced by as a large percentage of the older population as they should, and that is the payment of NAS via direct deposit. Because I really do feel that the elderly like to wait for that postman, get that check in their hand, and like to go line up like at the post office and chit chat with others. And as Adrian and Annette said, the social interaction of it all. But here we have the government itself on a thrust to digital as well. They have now introduced things like you can register your cars and stuff online. You can pay your taxes online. They too are going digital. And further to that, they've now started to possibly introduce and try to associate with, I think, Justin, perhaps you can help me on this. I was trying all day to remember the particular app out of Africa that we were speaking about recently. And I know that Paystack is one, which is a,
yes, M-Pesa.
yes, that one, for example. So now we have the government itself encouraging people to use all these digital payment options, but are we really ready in this region for this level of an advancement? And Justin, perhaps you can share your thoughts on it, because from my perspective, I see it as if we can't even get persons to use the ATM, we're not at that stage yet. Are we really, really ready to take it to that next level?
That was for me, Lana.
Yes, that was for you.
Yeah,
That was all for you.
I think we are more ready than most at the certainly technological level in terms of internet penetration, broadband access. We are much more prepared than other parts of the world. So it's really more the psychological side. And I think the issue really is the value proposition for persons. I think when people want something and they see the value of it, but for many people, they are comfortable with what they're doing. Barbados is a relatively small place. You can get a bus or a car, you can get to places. So like you mentioned M-Pesa. So you have in Kenya, people who are much less educated, much less internet savvy than Barbadians, but they're using M-Pesa, which is really a system where people really accept the equivalent, something like phone credits as money.
Mhm.
But in essence, for persons, there is a value proposition. It's not that easy to open a bank account. Many persons are self-employed. Transportation and moving around is difficult for a person. So being able to use this app on their smartphone, for them, it's a big leap forward. I think in Barbados, the value proposition is not as great for some, because you can open a credit union account, you can get a bank account, you can get to it easily. So I don't really see it as a negative, and I'm a great believer in competition, and we will see different models emerge
Mhm.
where there will be some institutions that are far down on the digital space, and there's a bigger section, there's a group of others that wants to embrace that, but there are others who want more face-to-face, and other players will offer that. So I am not disheartened by these competing models and this notion that everybody has to be one way digitally. I think you have different customers out there, they have different needs. We are a unique space as well. Barbados is a place where there is no country, there's no place cut off. So I think so digitization might play out differently here than other places, and we have to be careful of that one size fit all. So we have now Sagicor at one extreme.
Mhm.
That's a digital bank. We have the credit unions at maybe the other extreme, where you have a lot of interaction. And I am keen to see how this plays out. And my view is, let the models contend.
I agree with you, Justin. I'm also very anxious and excited to see how it plays out as well, because it's interesting how Sagicor, whether people will accept and how soon they will embrace the digital bank of Sagicor. But as you said, competition is good, and it allows one to keep on their toes. So Richard, the banks are racing, and the credit unions now, I'm wondering how you're going, how are you going to keep up? So I see another comment in the chat.
That's some free consulting advice for the banks, right? Be careful how you take a business model from your parent countries and try to transplant it exactly into a space that may be very different for a variety of reasons, and how you fine tune a model for a particular environment.
Yes, sorry, Richard, did you?
I was saying, yeah, that's kind of true for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are of the international banks are probably guilty of that. The initiatives are, started elsewhere, and it's, you're given this plan and said, okay, but this is yours to execute. Sometimes with very little input from the market itself. We have another comment in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Richard. You want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say something. I think one of the things we have to do right now, the value proposition very often comes into play when you truly cannot access the bank. And I would say for persons who they're taking care of their elderly relatives or sick relatives, that is one. I think, Carla, you may see it, Lana, as a banker, you'll see it, or persons who are overseas.
Mhm.
Everything is fine until it isn't fine. So that day that you break your foot, you can't come to the bank, you still need to have your bills paid.
Yeah.
Or are responsible for taking care of your aunt or your mom or your dad, and they're still getting a pension. They may have the household maintenance to do and so on, but they can't get out to the bank. But you're tasked with this responsibility. A lot of persons who know how to do that, and it's very difficult to do so. I think we have to help people to understand it's not only just about for the convenience in the moment, but what about those moments when you can't get to the bank and you truly need to access your funds, right? And that's one of the things that we have to help people to understand as a value proposition, because you said everything is hunky-dory. We're coming up to the uni, we're going down to the bank, see the friend we haven't seen in years, and we're happy, happy, happy. And then the day comes, it's COVID, it's illness, it's whatever, and then you can't access your funds. And you're standing at the bank saying, I really need to access money from my mom's account. And we're saying to you, no, you can't. You don't have, we can't give it to you. And you're always in a difficult place. So I'd say to persons, start looking at things like that. And how do you prepare for those eventualities? I keep telling my friends, get a power of attorney, go on your parents' bank accounts, those type of things, because there will come that inevitable moment. And it helps by using these non-traditional methods. So that's something we should.
I think on that note, Richard, that you're saying it's like a culture shift. And I think right now that's, if one wants to see some of the good things that have come out of COVID of advice in terms of what families need to be looking at, because yes, we've seen a lot of cases where COVID has affected the elderly, but we all know it's affected people of all ages. And I would say now is the time, given what we've seen go through the pandemic and that not having access, think about if something were to happen, what arrangements do I have in place? Do I maybe have too many bank accounts? Sometimes people realize with this whole thing, maybe they need to scale down what they have and make sure that critical and key people are on their bank accounts. Those were things that came out of chats that I had with close friends and alumni that, think about these things for your families, because some families have found themselves in predicaments that we all know, given the circumstances, sometimes takes a longer time to sort out because they don't have another person on their bank account. Therefore, they can't access certain funds. And folks have been looking like that. If you have elderly parents, Richard talked about making sure it's somebody you trust. It may be now time to have them joint on their account. There are lots of things that have come out of COVID that I think people need. Maybe it didn't happen to them, but if they know somebody and they can share an experience. I know one friend, her mother died unexpectedly. Unfortunately, it was a heart attack. It wasn't COVID. But she realized that, for example, her credit card didn't have insurance. I mean, these aren't things, her mother wasn't expected to die. And she said, had she known, she would have had these things in place. And I think Richard really hit the nail on the head in terms of value proposition. Everything is great now for certain people, but you may be that person where something unexpected happens. What have you in place to help your loved ones to make sure that in a difficult crunch, they have access to funds? So those are the things people need to be taking into consideration, because I think what has struck a lot of us is that COVID isn't only something that can affect elderly people. It can affect anybody. And there's so many things negative that come out of COVID with stress and mental health and different things. It really causes you to pause and think about, well, what do I have in place in the event of?
Absolutely.
Good point, Carla. Excellent point. So I go back to the chat and I have a note here from Rita. And she says, as we look towards the future, I'm being very honest when I say I tend to encourage younger folk in building a financial future in a variety of investment options. How do you see the role of banks in the future through offering attractive products to those you engage the technology and not likely to go to brick and mortar institutions? So Justin, I'm going to give you this one because I think it's speaking more to investments. And I noticed that you've had you do offer a series of, I think it's Investing 101 or Stock Market Investing 101 or 102 or so that I see being offered as short courses. So perhaps you can speak to this, because I think what she's really asking is how do you see the role of banks in the future through offering attractive products to those who prefer to use technology rather than going into the brick and mortar institutions?
Okay, right. So, I mean, I'm not one who beats up on the banks. I mean, I almost see banks as almost like a utility. You know, I see banking like electricity, water. I mean, I see banking as an essential part of the infrastructure of a modern economy, accepting deposits, making loans. I mean, the form is continually evolving. What I do see is from the investing course shop we put on, there's a growing number of persons who are interested in building a nest egg, investing from early. People have a lot more access to information. They hear about the stock market and so on. So I think maybe a growth area for banks would be things like mutual funds, stockbroking, and so on, because I know there are a number of persons who are interested in that. And I've been quite surprised by that. You know, when we first put on those courses, we thought we would get 50 people and run it once. I think we are like on our 5th or 6th group, and we've had like 200 people each time. So, so there's a growing number of persons that are interested, and the banks are well placed to capitalize on expanding their product offering, and the credit unions as well, because people are familiar with these institutions already. They have a relationship. And that may be a growth area as people are trying to make their money work for them.
It's interesting that you say that, Justin, because it brings to mind, I recall years ago, there was a product that a financial institution offered, and it was something called a stock market account. And it was an account where I think you could invest a given amount. You were guaranteed your interest back, but you were told that the possibility existed that you may or may not get a return, but you were guaranteed your investment back. And when some of those deposits matured and people did not get a return, well, I can't tell you, Justin, what kind of feedback was given, because at the end of the day, it seemed as though persons heard about the stock market. They weren't entirely happy. They weren't even just happy that, okay, at least I got my deposit back. They were just upset because they expected a huge return. So I feel like what your course is offering, Justin, should actually be a good way to educate persons so that they become more aware of the fact that yes, the stock market is an investment, but it's also a risky investment depending on the type of investments and so that you invest in. So, and Justin, do you believe though that this interest is being driven by the fact that the banks now are already not offering a lot of interest or so on their accounts on deposit?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a couple of things going on. I mean, like Barbados is quite an interesting place in because people say that Barbadians are risk averse, and I find that challenging because I walk around and I see so many people playing the lottery. I mean, you can't be can't be anything risky than that. And when people join our course, I'm quite surprised that a lot of persons are like trading Forex online. They're trading options. I mean, this is really risky stuff. This is not the tame end of the market. So we seem to have this dichotomy where persons are doing risky things. They're diving in, doing online investment. But then there's another relatively risk-averse group. Yeah. I think the public information is quite important. So I think that's one, information. And there's a lot of information on the internet. Right? So I think people are interested because they now see their online things pop up, ads pop up, they see trading networks, etc. So people are on social media a lot and they're exposed to a lot of advertising around investing, and that's piquing their interest. But many are not knowledgeable enough to then take the next step. So I think that education is important. Mm-hmm. I also think that being able to do this with an institution they know and trust So that's why I think the banks and the credit unions that people already have a relationship with, that they can go in and talk to somebody, explain to them the tax, the regulatory, the forex, and so on. So I think that's a growth area potentially for our financial institutions, particularly in Barbados, because if you go to Jamaica, Jamaica is a highly financialized society. You know?
Mhm.
A lot of these investment options are now every day in Jamaica and Trinidad to some extent. I mean, Trinidad, a lot of people have unit trust, mutual funds. We haven't had that penetration here in Barbados to the same extent. And I would certainly like to see the financial institutions make a big push in trying to get to the retail investor. I think we have stuff, but it's for the medium to large investor, but really not much targeted at the retail. And of course, as you mentioned, the low interest rate environment and the fact that we've had the government debt restructuring,
Mhm.
where there hasn't been access to government instruments, and people still remembering the bad taste of that restructuring, that they are looking for alternatives. But there's more risk appetite in Barbados than I think people think there is. I think there is an appetite for risk. It's really products being offered and promoted to them by institutions they know and trust. I see that as the missing link.
Good points raised, Justin. Now, I'm going to kind of switch a little bit, and we're still talking about digital banking, but one of the area we were talking about access to funds and so, but I think one of the areas that COVID also helped us with was simple things like opening accounts and so online. Now, prior to COVID, you had to go into bank, you had to make an appointment, you had to wait and all this type of thing. Now I see that banks are even allowing you to open accounts online using your app and all those kind of things. So I think that's wonderful. But it has opened the door too in terms of, are we at the stage now where we are comfortable accepting these documents and stuff digitally? I know that there was some hesitation for some time from central bank and so in terms of accepting the digital documents. People talked about there was something in the app that said you had to have original signatures and so on file. But Carla and Richard, tell me now, from a banking perspective, are we truly comfortable with accepting these things digitally and making the process of opening a simple account so much easier for persons?
I would say we are to an extent if you're an existing customer. I think that's a big difference right now. If you're an existing client and you want to open an additional account, there's definitely a higher comfort level. If you're brand new to the bank, I would still say there is this that you need to actually come in and have that face-to-face. Now, after that, then it becomes a lot easier. I would say the comfort level has increased significantly because of COVID. So because you couldn't not open an account or not do something, especially for an existing customer, they can't physically come in. So yes, a lot more has been accepted digitally, but I think that still is a strong emphasis on existing customers that you have a relationship with versus somebody brand new not walking in, just calling you and you doing everything online and never even meeting that person.
Mm-hmm. And what about from the credit union perspective, Richard?
I think we have to get comfortable, and we're getting more comfortable. I think recently implementation of the Data Protection Act has really helped us along in becoming more comfortable. We have a choice but to fall in line. So right now we have a major project going to make sure that we are in line with the Data Protection Act. So we're feeling more comfortable that we have, and I think this is credit unions and financial institutions. We're feeling more comfortable that this now is being regulated. We now know how we can accept information digitally. We now know that we don't always have to have paper-based documentation. Digitally, there's some regulation around how that works. And Barbados, I find that we are very, very rules-based. If there isn't a rule for it, and if we can't go to like a circular somewhere that says you can do 1, 2, 3, and 4, we ain't ever going to do it. Even though when we do the analysis of the risk, it shows there's really no major risk, right? But Barbados is moving in a good direction, and I feel Dr. Robinson, Professor Robinson, would be able to give us more detail around the Data Protection Act. But I think it's helping us as an institution to feel more comfortable. So now we're now in a space actually where we're moving towards looking for an online membership application solution for our members, because we understand, like yourself, Lana and Carla, we don't want people coming into us and spending long times to open an account. We want people to be able to do it online. We want persons in the diaspora to be able to do it online. That's a major push for the credit unions right now. People in the diaspora want to save at home. People want to come back to Barbados and have a nest egg when they retire. So how do we make it easy to be able to open a bank account from New York or from London, or wherever these persons are located? So once we have rules, we are very rules based. So once we have rules, we are becoming a lot more comfortable. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about how that's going to work, Justin. Cool.
Justin, I think that Richard kind of threw it over to you.
Yes, I think it's an important point, because in a way we've had a conversation about digital banking without mentioning that issue of cybersecurity and the security of information. And that is a real concern for some persons as well, putting that information into that digital space. So I think having that Data Protection Act, which doesn't only affect banking, it affects
anything
across. It's a big thing for the university. It's an act with some interesting bits, Lana, include. One of the things that surprised me is that you have the right to be forgotten.
Whoa.
We tend to have a record on you for every course you did at UWI from way back, and at a certain point, certain things are supposed to drop off your record because you have the right to be forgotten. So I found that quite interesting. But I think that data protection aspect and having the legislation and a set of rules, along with COVID, I think these are two of the most important developments in pushing us into that digital space for persons who want to be there, because that concern about their data and what can happen to their data as you put it online, I think is a major issue and it's well documented. The use of smartphones and having the mobile banking apps, I think, is a major factor in the heavy use, because with Facebook and WhatsApp, people of all ages are using their smartphones. So moving from that to using an online banking app on your phone, I think, is a much smaller step than having to log on to a computer and et cetera, et cetera. So I think having access on the mobile phones or the smartphones is important, as well as that data protection and adequate cybersecurity. I think those are some of the missing links for those persons who have that fear.
Yeah. You are correct, Justin, because when COVID started and we started this big push and stuff to get clients to continue to do the online, to open accounts and so online, some people were very hesitant to doing it. Some people, they didn't want to share their information digitally. They were so concerned. And actually, there were some people who said, my passport is not going anywhere. I'm not sharing it with anyone. If you have somebody that can come to my office and take the information, sure, but I am not putting my passport in particular online. And particularly, people that are in the diaspora. And so that is even bigger an issue because, as we know, fraud is more significant in those areas as it relates to Social Security and those type of things than it is so far for us here in the region. But I think that banks are doing quite a bit to try to get persons and to beef up their data, their cybersecurity and that type of thing, to get people comfortable with using it. Because really, as you said earlier, Justin, this is the way forward. And we really want to encourage people to use these spaces to make their lives a little bit easier. So we have one more comment in the chat, and it's from Dilo. And he says, excuse me, I work at an institution that encourages elderly persons to have their funds deposited to their accounts. I had quite a few conversations with the elderly persons who only made the switch because they were scared that they would not receive their funds. Some mentioned that during the early days of COVID, they were concerned that they would not receive their checks via the postal officers. Of course, there is also the issue of fear that those elderly persons have with providing others with access to their funds. So I think, Richard, you were mentioning to me before that the credit union, you have a big initiative going where you are trying to work with like the NIS, for example, and to try to partner with them to see if you can get more persons to open accounts with you and become more comfortable with receiving their pension funds in that way. Have you made any progress?
Yes, we have. I think there are two things. Firstly, the credit union being the animal it is, we have been typically receiving a paper listing. Think back to your early days in banking, Lana, where you get a list and you physically have to keep each individual check, right? And that in itself made it very challenging for our pensions in a timely manner. There always was the opportunity for pensions then to be late, for persons to be calling and asking, have y'all posted the pension yet? Have y'all posted the pension yet? It went, and it's not there. So what we've been able to do initially is to work with the NIS for them to be able to provide an electronic listing to the credit union so we can upload that automatically in a lot shorter space of time. The other thing that we're looking to do is how do we look at our members who still are coming in and depositing checks and being very purposeful around getting those persons to sign up and working with the NIS for those groups of persons that are doing that. So there's a major thrust on our part. The other thing the credit union is doing, and I'm not sure if people really recognize it, is becoming a member of what we call the ACH. Is that interconnectivity between the banks. So currently all the banks, if you deposit a check at a Scotia bank, those funds can be on the account of another bank in the next morning. The credit unions don't have that interconnectivity into the financial services space. And that is something major that's being pushed across all the credit unions at this moment, well, at least the larger ones, because we're recognizing that if you're talking about the ease of banking, that we can't have persons choosing the credit union as their primary financial institution, but then to be able to access the funds, it's taking way too long. So that's something that we're pushing as well, to make sure that our pensioners, for example, and persons who use the credit union for their primary payroll account can have access to their account in a much faster turnaround time. So there's so much work being done. It's amazing what happens in the background. They just don't recognize you've been pushing us and we've been listening and we're making things happen. And again, at a national level, the government, this current administration really sees how important it is to make sure that the population has access to their funds, particularly during the COVID period. And just in general, I think we have a major push, you mentioned it earlier, Lana, to become more digital. And that's a very intentional activity of this current administration. And there's pressure being put, for lack of a better word, on the credit unions to make sure we come up to the time. And it's working because we're hot on the trail to do it. So that's going to help everyone in the long run, for sure.
Thanks, Richard. Annette, I noticed you started to type a comment in the chat. Did you want to continue with the comment? Or was there something you wanted to say? Because I just see one word in the chat there. I'm guessing she doesn't want to follow on to the comment at this point in time, but you will hear from Annette shortly, because Annette is actually the chairperson of the Conversations Committee, and she will be coming up a little bit later to do the closing prayer for us. So I believe at that point in time, she will chime in with any comments that she may have. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a pretty robust, she wants to be unmuted. Shannon, can you unmute Annette, please? Just give us Shannon. Sorry, while we're waiting for Annette to be unmuted, I was going to say that we've been having a pretty robust, you ready, Annette?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thank you so very much. Good evening, panel, and thank you for your input. I really enjoyed it so far. I recognize that this really is the digital revolution, and I'm all on board for it because if you want to play, you've got to pay. And therefore, it brings me to my point, because the banks, well, the financial institutions, I should say, there's a cost attached to these various upgrading of the systems, the introducing apps and so on. There is a cost attached. And this cost is an investment for the financial institutions. And how are they going to recoup their investments except to pass it on? Or perhaps grow their membership, grow their customer base, hoping to recoup that investment. And I would like to say that, yes, persons want to get on board, but these banking fees have some persons frightened. We got them very, very, you talk about risk averse, but I don't know, some persons are risk averse, yeah, but we're frightened of some of these fees. Yes, as I said, you want a return on your investment, but how can you not be burdened with these fees? That's not up to us. We just have to go with the flow.
Okay, but Carla, before I wouldn't throw you into the fire because you're the banker. So I will go to Justin, who really is on the board of Central Bank, and I'll kind of throw him into the fire a bit first before we get to you, Carla, because I know that I know that the Central Bank really has been speaking out a bit more about these their position on banking fees, and so I don't know if you want to share anything on that, Justin, before we.
Well, I was hoping to leave this one to the bankers, but
I could chip in when you're ready.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of regulating fees per se. I tend to take the view that competition can take care of these things. Banks are in business to make money. I think, unlike what other people think, banks in Barbados are not especially profitable when you look at the return on assets. You know, banks are earning 3%, sometimes 2%. So it's certainly, and many of the banking fees, in terms of I understand, are somewhat avoidable. You know, you can make some choices, but I tend to like to leave these things to the market and let competition work it out. You know, at some point, if fees are chasing away customers, the market will take care of it, and someone will try to grab market share, but by competing on fees. So I guess that's a sort of ideological position that I have on many things. You know, let the market do its thing.
Okay, Carla, do you want to chime in? I know Richard is going to help you, because he did say he's going to help.
Thank you. I'm in total agreement in terms of, I think, Annette, as you're saying that, the fees discourage some persons, but I would say all banks, all institutions, sometimes there is an account that is free, but you have to ask. It should be offered, but you should ask. And typically there is a way that a customer can find the least expensive, if not one that really is something that can meet their needs, because you really don't want to be paying more fees than you need to. So I'm in agreement with that, but take into consideration that we all have to remember that the institutions are in the business to make money. So at the end of the day, we are spending, all of the institutions, billions of dollars, this is worldwide, to provide this digital platform for people to be able to use for the convenience. So therefore, yes, there will be a cost impact, because at the end of the day, if we don't have that cost coverage, the banks are not going to make any money. And I do think that overall, when you look at it, there's not a huge difference in fees across institutions. It's not like one institution is charging 50% more or 50% less. But I think each individual does need to explore and ask the questions, because there are avenues to make sure that you can pay the least amount of fees possible, because we do appreciate that customers have choices, and the competition makes us very aware that if my fee is extremely expensive, the person is going to go somewhere else. So I think keep that in mind, that it's really to ask the question, because there are options available.
Yeah, and then to build on it, I think Carla said something very important. The commercial banks literally are here their business is to generate revenue, right? And this costs a lot of money to be able to implement these solutions. The credit union movement, you know, in many instances, thankfully, are not always the best thing. It's a non-for-profit organization. So whenever we're at the end of the year, we're just supposed to break even for the most part. We pay our dividends to our members, etc., and we move on. But what we see is that a number of credit unions now are unable to implement these new solutions, these expensive technology solutions that's required to make banking more easy for its members. So we have instances, so the Public Workers is a very large credit union, and by extension, we're going to have a bit more cash. So what we find ourselves doing, ourselves and COB, is that very often we are backing the technology implementation for a lot of the smaller credit unions, because it just is so expensive to put these things in place. It literally costs millions of dollars. So you'd see a COB and a Public Workers, we're the ones leading the implementation of the Visa debit and the MasterCard debit rollout for the smaller credit unions. We've done it for ourselves, and now we're supporting the smaller credit unions because they can't afford to do it, you know? So, you know, on what you have, it's really a very difficult balancing act. Do we make money and be able to provide the level of services that are required for the persons, or do we not make as much profit and then not be able to provide the things that, you know, the customers and members are looking for? So it's that delicate balancing act that we try to do to make sure that we can provide it. So bear with the financial institutions. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there and work collectively to make it happen.
Good. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Richard. I thought that the explanations were, Annette, did the explanation satisfy your question?
No, she wants lower fees.
She wants lower fees, right?
Well, we don't charge fees at the credit union.
The church has to charge him for that ad, you know, for the Trinity too.
Yes, well,
But different business model.
yes, different business models, but you know, and it, you know, even you can, I guess what you can glean from what Richard is saying as well is that, you know, with the banks, they're going to charge you the fees, but you're going to get something back in some way, maybe not the way you may necessarily want it for a person that may not be willing to embrace the digital spaces yet, but at least you can see what they're doing with it. You can see that they're reinvesting it in terms of technology and those type of things for you to be able to utilize services in a different way. So Annette, I see you're still muted. Shannon, I think you could unmute Annette because she's going to come in just now to do her closing prayer. But while that is being worked on, I would say that we've had a very robust discussion tonight. I hope that persons who joined were able to walk away having learned something new from what we discussed tonight. And after Annette makes her comment, I'm then going to allow each panelist to do a short wrap up to cover anything that they want to say before we end the discussion for the evening. Annette?
Thanks, Lana. Although I understand what you're saying, I embrace to some extent the comments. I still think that there's a bankers association that perhaps when they get together and meet, there's not necessarily competition. So the market, Justin, will not necessarily take care of it. They'll take care of themselves. But one comment I wanted to mention earlier where Richard said that younger persons, you need to make younger persons more comfortable. The irony of the whole thing is perhaps that is so here in Barbados, but when they leave Barbados and they go overseas, they are extremely comfortable because nobody uses cash. Nobody uses cash. I mean, I was with my daughter overseas and she tapped her card to have bus fare only to find that it was all gone. And then turned to me and asked me, "Mommy, you got any change?" She had none. She had no money. They don't use cash. But it has been a very robust discussion and I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah. And I would say, though, to Richard's point, I think the challenge with the young people here is that a lot of them don't even have accounts. So I don't know if you remember when they first started doing the ash cleanup. And so and there were pictures in the paper where all of them were lined up down by,
Yeah.
I think it was the NHC building to get these checks, right?
Mhm.
So I think Carla mentioned it earlier that perhaps the time has come where people have to start from very young, introducing people to having an account. I think that those are still free. I don't think that those attract any fees as far as I'm aware. I think banks still actually encourage people to open accounts for like younger children. And so,
yes.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think that is the way to go. And I think the reason they've not applied any fees to those is because you want to encourage people to open those accounts for persons, because these will then become your future customers who will become your persons who will borrow from you and invest with you and do those type of things. So I think we got to start like at the very beginning. And then maybe then that comfort level will be there in terms of use of the technology. And so
I understand that. I understand that perfectly, because I have a situation now where Barbados Statistical Service falls under my portfolio, and the enumerators, they don't have bank accounts. Some of them, they just never thought to open a bank account.
It's true.
And I had a situation where I said to one, where's your national registration number? No, national insurance number, sorry. And they didn't have a national insurance number, so they went and got their mother's on. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way.
It does for other people. You'll be surprised on it. You'll be surprised. It's not a strange phenomenon.
yes. Well, so thank you, lady and gentlemen. So I'm going to start with, since I started with Carla and Richard went last, I'll start with Richard first for his little 2 minutes of wrap up before we go into Michael, who will do our wrap up for us for tonight. But let's start with you, Richard.
All right. Thank you very much again, everyone. For me, again, what's going to be most important coming up, anything we do coming out of this discussion, is making sure we provide persons with purposeful information, help them to become more comfortable using the various technologies, help them to understand what is available out there to make banking easier for them. Because unless we do that, we can do everything in the world. We can have all the best technology, we can have all the best services and so on. But until we get our persons comfortable, and unless we educate them, they're never going to use them. So I definitely will encourage you and thank you for doing sessions like this, and encourage you to do more sessions so persons can become more comfortable using the various financial services institutions.
Thanks, Richard. So Carla, because you're the lady, I can't put you last. I'll put you in the middle.
I would say that this session, I think, really has been one where I think you can see where, while we're discussing, you realize that a lot of people still are questioning a lot of things, hence the questions that we're getting. And I appreciate your comments as well, because I think we know that that comes up quite frequently. And I'm very glad you asked the question. But we need to really look at embracing the culture and embracing the shift, because as a country, I think we can appreciate that's globally where all countries are going. So if you want to be able to interact on a global stage, we also have to appreciate that we need to embrace the technology. I think we've seen the good with, even when I think of like the welcome stamp, people appreciate how easy it is to do business here. To a certain extent, I think compared to probably where they come from, may not be quite as seamless. But when you see things like that, you get to understand that Barbados, I think Justin even touched on it, is a lot more advanced than a lot of other countries. And I think we need to really continue with that, just to ensure that our quality of life continues to improve, the way we do business continues to improve. I think it's important that we bring everybody in the conversations. And I think this has shown that we all have, maybe some of us have a little bit more bias in terms of, because we're not exposed as much in the banking or financial sector, but you realize that it's all stratas of life, all age groups of people are impacted. And it's not just like one sector that isn't doing this and isn't doing that. It's everybody. And if we continue to work together and have more discussions, and we have these forums, and to make more information available online, make more information available virtually, have more conversations, that we too can appreciate and embrace the technology and where we need to go.
Thank you, Carla. And last but not least, Justin.
Thanks. I always think that time is that totally elastic variable. With all the technology, it's 24 hours in a day. There ain't nothing you could do. So time is fixed. So My view is these technologies give you more control over your time and how you use your time. So I would encourage persons to embrace these technologies because they give you some more control over that one variable that is fixed, your time. You need to, I think we all need to be we need to be informed consumers that there are many service providers out there. They have many different products. I think we need to invest the time in finding the products that best suit us. But the technology is there to allow us to manage our time better. And I would encourage persons to become informed and take advantage of it.
Thanks for that, Justin. Thank you, panelists. I will now turn you over to Michael Brown. He is the other member of our Conversations Committee, and he will do our wrap up and thank you tonight. Michael?
Hey, thank you, Lana. On the outset, let me say the session was very educational and informative, and I think we all would have gleaned some new things from the session. One of the things that would have permeated the discussion was the need for us to embrace the new technology as we seek to become partners in this whole session in terms of easier banking. And we would have gone from the I would say the mundane, with having to run to the bank at 5 o'clock to using ATMs. But one of the things that came across was that we still have fears, and it's not only the old people, there's some young persons who are not comfortable with using the facilities. And if we're going to be transitioning to making banking easier, obviously we're going to have to be using ATMs and online banking. Now, what was posited was that the institutions need to be at the forefront of educating persons, making it easier for persons to engage. And one of the things which was said and said more than once, the value proposition. What is in it for me? Why do I need to change? And this is the comment we had while planning this session. The social aspect of coming out to the bank to do your banking. We are moving forward, and in terms of embracing the whole aspect of making banking easier, I was happy that a comment was made in terms of not only moving into digital banking, but the facility to make your life easier with investments and the link with educating. Professor Robinson speaking about the courses at KFIL and investment. And something that was said, which was, I think, debunked an issue that we are risk averse. And coming out tonight, it said that we are not probably in majority risk averse. We are willing to take risks, but we also have to be mindful. And Lani spoke to this, that in terms of investment and risk, when I lived somewhere else, the comment was made that you should invest, but make sure the money you're going to use for investment is not your money to pay your bills and buy your food. Because even though you can have returns, you can also lose your investment. So that is the juxtapositioning in terms of there's money to be made in terms of investment, but you have to understand the concept and the role and functioning. And I'm happy that university is in the forefront of having that done. Now, we spoke about the banking, the traditional banks and the credit unions, but at the end of the day, the framework in terms of I wrote this down in terms, Justin, you were asked to speak to this in terms of the framework, the legal framework, in terms of moving to digital banking, online banking. We have the facilities, but persons have to be comfortable that it's all legal. We made it fun that you're not going to lose your money, but in terms of with the ATM, you can reverse it. But in terms of this whole framework, the legal framework, in terms of going into investment, looking at these other instruments, we have to be comfortable that government and the financial institutions have put these things in place for us to be comfortable. Fees have always been a bugbear, and I will not speak to the bank that I've used since 1987, and I have not moved, but it has the highest fees in the world. But I guess the customer service, let me confess, I am not fully online banking. I'm in terms of some of the institutions I'm working with, but that bit of it in terms of, but to take away, my takeaway from this tonight is your clients have to be comfortable. The facilities are there to make it easier. Justin spoke about this more than once in terms of timing, but clients have to feel comfortable and trust the process. Institutions have to understand that some of us out here, both young and old, are not comfortable. We need to have our hands held, but we know, as Cara just said, if we want to play with the big boys, we have to join and follow the rules and regulations. Again, an excellent presentation, and we have food for thought and know that as customers, we have to probably at times push the institutions, but we are partners in the process. Thanks to the panel. Excellent presentations.
Thanks, Michael. And I volunteer to hold your hand and take you to the bank and make sure you're comfortable, that you're signed up for all the digital services that you require. So here you are, right, Michael? So no excuses anymore. So I'll now turn it over to Annette now to close us off in a word of prayer for the evening.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we come to the end of our time together, we thank you for what has been accomplished here tonight. May the matters discussed serve as a catalyst to move us forward, causing us to advance and make the necessary changes in all areas of our lives, be it in our places of work, our schools, our church, our parish, and indeed our nation. In those areas that we seek additional guidance or further clarity, embolden us to reach out to those who have the technical knowledge to assist. Above all, Heavenly Father, may we leave these various online platforms recognizing that you are the one true and living God, the God of all wisdom and the God that surpasses all understanding. This we pray in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And together we say, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, and I wish you a good night.
All right, thanks. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Keep safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you
everyone.
again, Richard.